welcome Judge Kemp with us today as a guest on Bourbon with Beagle, a talk on the rocks. And thank you, Judge, for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Great. There are two questions that I always ask all of our guests. One is, what generation are you associated with?
I was born in 1964, so that would put me uh, in the tail end of the baby boomer generation, I
Uh,
believe.
so, do you consider yourself a baby boomer or a X generation person?
I think I have multiple generational tendencies, so I kind of
Sure.
dabble in both sides of the track.
Okay. Yeah, it's if you're right there on the border, it's kind of hard to associate because the boomer generation is has so many individuals in it and years reflected in it that it's hard to determine if you're like those individuals or the X individuals. So, and do you have a personal philosophy on aging?
I actually have two.
Oh, great.
One is I'm doing my best to defy gravity. In other words, I'm trying to keep it all high and tight to reduce the jiggle. Um,
Understood.
and the other is, it's going to happen to us all if we're lucky, and I'm not about to allow the numbers to slow me down.
Sure, sure. Well, I always tell people that numbers are there, but it's not a true reflection of age or mindset. And so I have clients and friends that are 90 and you would think they were 60, and I have 60-year-olds that think they are 90. So it's really just a mindset on doing that one. So, well, great. One of the things that I think is so amazing is that you've had a really great journey, an interesting journey. And so, how has that evolved and led you to your point where you are today?
That's a really good question. Um, and I'll do my best to kind of keep my response brief.
Uh,
I could go back as far and say I was born a poor black child, but somebody's already said that. But honestly, I was an awkward, gangly kid, a bit uncoordinated. In high school, I got involved in theater and dance, and that's really where I found my footing, if you pardon the pun.
uh,
Um, and after high school, I was studying in college, and I saw this audition notice for a production at SeaWorld in San Diego, and the show was called City Streets. And so I ended up being cast in that show for a number of years. And now, strangely, this past weekend just had a mini reunion with some of those folks, and I haven't seen some of them in about 30 years. So fast forward through life in LA, Amsterdam. I'm in Portland now. This is actually where my partner was living when we met. And really, when I got here, I was volunteering with lots of organizations such as Red Dress Party, Basic Rights Oregon, Our House of Portland, and CAP. And I believe this is really how, through the involvement with these great organizations, that so many of the doors were open for me. And that's where I am today.
right. So, how did the Amsterdam experience living outside the U.S. Uh, how did that feel for you?
I loved it. I spent 7 years in Holland, and I honestly say, even though my love is here in Portland, my heart still is in Amsterdam. And, there's something about that city that is magical to me.
Hmm.
It introduced me to so many things in response to, with regard to travel and to other cultures and flavors, all of those wonderful things that, I never really was introduced to while living a stationary life in the US.
Right, right. One of the things I think that in Holland, especially in Europe, is that gives me as a different perspective on, like you said, different cultures. And, the US tends to think we can do everything the right way, but there are other models out there that seem to work very, very well.
True.
We're just not open to them being brought into the U.S. And that's mainly on the aging population that I'm more familiar with than anything. But so what is one of the key things you learned from your experience in Amsterdam?
Well, living there, I know that, for example, you just hit the nail on the head. Um, Here in the US, we tend to think that, it's our way or the highway.
Right.
Whereas I personally feel that there are other policies that could really be of benefit to us if we were to look at them, such as some of the social
Hmm.
services, those programs and things, I think would really be a better benefit for us all. Um, but our culture, our country isn't designed that way, and
Right.
we're kind of paying that price now.
Well, I think one of the things that I've seen, especially in the aging community, is they tend to benefit from new ideas. And I'll use an example: people in wheelchairs that have disabilities that do the little rolling thing with the wheels. This has been 15 years ago. I saw the first one where they were actually having to do hand pulls back and forth to move. And I thought that is an awesome idea to be able to do that instead of having to do the wheels. But I haven't seen them in the US at all. So I think that's one aspect on aging that comes about when I think about other parts of the world and the services that they provide. So, what would you say contributed to the most to where you find yourself today?
Um, I think honestly, I would have to say the strong support systems that I have in place here. And I think about the support of my family, and that also includes my partner, my
Hmm.
husband, and also our close friends. We affectionately call them the posse. Um, some amazing social justice
Right.
minded folks, and talented artistically, and just wonderful, amazing, creative people.
Sure.
Their support and their love um, really has made me who I am today. And I don't think, if I didn't have those influences with me, I don't think I would be definitely the person I am today.
I agree. It's the support systems that we all have that help us uh, to grow and to become the best that we can of ourselves.
Absolutely.
You talked a little bit, we did, about policy and seeing it in different parts of the world. And my understanding, you were a policy analyst for the state of Oregon. So how did you bring some of those insights that you got in other parts of the world into that role?
Well, honestly, that title is very technical in comparison to what I actually really did.
Oh,
Um, I was the boards and commissions programs manager. So I didn't really have a lot of personal influence when it came to the policy side. However, though, that your question, policy can elevate a decision into actionable practice. That is, that is something that, Oregon, our state, um, being very proactive, was able to have protection for reproductive rights for women, for example.
right. So how did your experience being a Black gay man, um, what did that contribute to advocacy for you in other roles and policy as well?
Yeah, for me, made it, I made it my personal mission to try to do what I could to introduce people of color to a lot of the boards and commissions.
Sure.
And I was very happy that, our governor also wanted to do more to make the boards and commissions more inclusive. Um, my executive director that I worked with, she also was uh, supportive of those decisions, and we would also often talk about people we could suggest to be appointed.
In what perspective do you think a person of color would bring to that would be extremely beneficial to these boards? Because usually they're very white male boards on this one. Luckily, in the Northwest, we have women that have now started to come into those boards. But what perspective do you think what people of color can bring into the discussion?
Well, there's the lived experience
Right.
is one thing. There is the unfortunately the academic side of life is probably an area that is not um, highly a logical component of our lives,
Mm-hmm.
due to how our systems have been established and have been maintained. So, lived experiences is one way people of color can contribute to these boards and commissions. And I think in some of these commissions, they have requirements to do this. So you have to be part of that. And I think that said, that kind of puts the boards and commissions at a disadvantage because they will only attract, a certain type of individual
Sure.
to their program if they're that way.
I see it more as a lens. Each individual comes to the table with a different lens of looking at things. And so, collaboratively, hopefully, you can come up with a solution or insights that were not necessarily there at the beginning when you started the discussions. But how do you think Oregon, Washington, California have done in trying to instigate policy that has trying to incorporate some of the individuals of color and GLBTQ plus individuals into their roles that they can play within the states?
That's a really good question. And unfortunately, every state has their own policy when it
Mm,
comes to involvement. So I don't really have a response for that. I can only speak to what was done in Oregon, where
right.
uh, being part of the LGBTQAI plus 2+ community uh, is definitely something that, from a state government standpoint, is not a detriment.
Mm,
Unfortunately, in several states throughout the country, you can still be fired for being gay.
that's right.
So here we are at least encouraged to, be ourselves, be true to
Right.
ourselves, and that is something that some of us are fortunate to do in our workplaces.
Right. My native home state where I was born, Oklahoma, is not too great on the
Mhm.
LGBTQ plus um, uh, decisions that they make with regard to that, and very anti, if anything. In the same way with Texas, I grew up mostly in Texas,
Mhm.
but I did leave when Ann Richards was governor, so I did my part on at least having her the governor when I left, and it's went downhill ever since. But I think that probably the perspective that we can bring to it is one of inclusion, for one thing, and listening to individuals that have different lenses than ourselves and saying to those individuals that matters, your perspective matters, and then hopefully we can come together with something that policy or a decision that is made based on those different perspectives. Um, and
Absolutely.
and hopefully that is what needs to be done. So you've also have a podcast and a blog, I believe.
Well, I've been thinking about the podcast. I haven't actually gotten that far. So
Oh,
for the time being, it's just a blog.
okay.
But that said, yes, I do have a blog.
And I the name that I think is under it is Judge but Not Be Judged. Maybe is that the name of it?
Close. It's
Okay,
judge, don't judge, much.
much. Totally off. That's what I get for not reading my little paper here and having it down on that one. So great name. How did that come about, and what does that mean?
Well, you know, it all really came about starting in 2013, and not specifically my blog, but back in 2013, the Boy Scouts were in a bit of a pickle with their anti-gay policies.
Hmm.
And in protest, many Eagle Scouts, which I happen to be, were sending their eagle pins back in protest.
Hmm.
And a girlfriend of mine at the time, Roy Thorpe, who's this uh, great social justice warrior, she had recently had something published in Huffington Post. And I was talking to her and mentioned that, you know, it would be really great if I could, you know, I want to write something. And so
Hmm.
she actually encouraged me to write something and ended up pitching it to the Huffington Post folks, and they ended up publishing it. And
Congratulations.
thank you. It was about how, you know, from my perspective, I couldn't just, you know, turn my eagle pin in, because as a Black person, as a gay person, you know, that it took a lot for me just to get through Scouts altogether, and to make
Sure.
the rank of Eagle. I think it's less than 4%. So for me to just, you know, submit it to turn it back in, I also had to think about what my mother went through, for me to be a part of the scouting program, all of those things. Anyway, that's really how I ended up getting involved in blogging. And they had set me up, Huffington Post set me up with an account so that I can submit things and
Hmm.
publish it whenever I wanted. But when they shuttered their contributor platform, um, I still wanted to share my thoughts and observations. And so that's when I started my own blog.
Well, great. Now, it's really interesting to me that you wrote about the Eagle Scout pin, and what brought you to the conclusion? I know you said your mother and how hard it was to do it. Was there any other factors that contributed to you maintaining that pin and having a voice about it?
You know, it was really, I was just thinking about my mother and the sacrifices that she
Sure,
made. You know, she
sure.
had to, you know, some of the camping excursions that I went through had to be financed somehow. And
Yeah,
the amount of work that she would have to work an extra job sometimes just to have a little extra money
right.
to put me through Scouts.
Yeah. Well, that's a great contribution. So where did you grow up?
I was born in Fayetteville, North Carolina,
So
so
you come from the South.
I come from the South.
Well, Texas and Oklahoma is a little bit on the South, but sometimes not, depending on what geographical area you're from. But I
Right.
think those perspective, I had a lovely guest on recently about, and she's from North Carolina, Stacy Rice.
Yes, love Stacy.
Stacy's great. And so we got to talking a little bit about the differences between the South and the West Coast. And, and it really had some interesting insights, Stacy did. But do you have any insights as well coming from that background to to the West Coast on how growing up in that region and area has affected how you are today and where you are?
Well, I was a military brat, so the one thing that I still recall from the time that I was there, and I
Mm-hmm.
lived, you know, we lived in North Carolina, you know, Kentucky. We lived several of the core states
Mm-hmm.
on the East, and the Midwest. The one thing I can recall most is the mentality around uh, Black people,
Mm-hmm.
and how there is almost this passive acceptance of racism that is, I can't say still exhibited today because I don't live there,
Mm-hmm.
but from what I understand, there are still pockets that, you don't, you don't look a white person in the face,
Hmm. Right.
that type of old mentality. But in comparison to the West Coast, it's a little different. Granted, we have our freedoms. In Oregon, it is probably one of the whiter states in the
Sure.
union. Um, and we do have more freedoms here. I don't feel so afraid. However, I live in a bubble of Portland,
Right.
and if you go to the west side towards, even in Beaverton, for example,
Hmm.
that changes.
Hmm.
I recall seeing, large Confederate flags flying high out of the back of a pickup truck on one of my trips, to the west side. And I was thinking, like, why? Yeah. So anyway, it I'm grateful to living here in the West, in the Pacific Northwest
Hmm.
specifically, because I have the nature that's
Hmm.
here in abundance.
Right.
Um, I have more freedoms, with regard to my sexuality,
Hmm.
and I have, um, I have a beautiful home. I have a
Hmm.
handsome partner. I have all of these things that I would not have had
Right.
um, on the East.
I think there's a little, and still in some of these states, even in the military communities, I have a cousin that her and her husband are biracial
Mhm.
marriage, and they were down at Tinker Air Force Base down in Oklahoma City, Midwest City. And she was taken back because she's from the Northwest as well, was
Mhm.
very taken back how many negative comments and connotations were made about just the interracial marriage issue.
Mhm.
So, I just find that totally fascinating to one extent, but kind of I'm going, oh my God, I can't believe we're still fighting this fight in 2022.
Right.
Um, and that's the same with GLBTQ plus individuals.
Mhm.
But, I go down there to visit relatives. And again, I see the Confederate flags. I see all of the hate things going on. And it's just like, my gosh, I thought we had won this battle, but we haven't yet.
That is yet. Absolutely.
Absolutely. On that. So, what on your blog, what are some of the topics that you're interested in writing about? I did look at the Eagle Scout one. That was very moving and very good. Um,
Thank you.
to have that out there. But you had some other ones on there that were just as interesting. So what do you like to cover in your blog?
My tagline is observations of life, liberty, and the ever elusive pursuits of happiness. So it's generally pretty broad. I will write about, social justice things. I will write about, things within the queer community.
Mm-hmm.
I'll also write about, my experiences just in life. I recently wrote a piece called The Dancer in Me, which talks about discovering my rhythm. And I also recently wrote another piece that's kind of a follow up to that one called LA and the Porn Star. So yeah, there's,
That one did
there's
catch my eye. I want you to know that.
it's not as tawdry as it sounds, but it is just kind of a coming of age, story that I think people can relate to in some way.
Right,
And that's what I usually try to do, is to, create a conversation, for
right.
people when they read my work.
I just did a segment with a young man, Cameron, who is Youth Pride Association. Um, and it's a nonprofit that they've set up to go in and do gay awareness weeks in schools. And it was pretty profound to me that this young man, who's probably early 20s, had experienced that. But like you, he came from a military family background where they moved around and all of those things. But one of the things he was really saying was that now that Florida can't say gay policy, they've had to pull back all of theirs. Programs out of there, but there still is a need for our community to be, especially the youth, to have a peer group, to have someone that they can talk to and relate to about these issues happening in both rural and urban schools. So hopefully you'll listen to that. That'll be coming out soon. But it really brings home how growing up in these Southern type environments, sometimes those are the ones that need the support systems the most.
Right, right.
So when you write, you have a theater dancing background. You have all of these different perspectives on those things. So how do you bring all of those perspectives when you talk about one specific topic, or a topic such as the dancer within me, or that time? We know dancing is part of your background, but other perspectives that were brought into that subject.
Well, when I was dancing, um, I always looked at that as a way out for me,
Mm-hmm.
a way to explore, a way to see the world. And I think that has helped me meet people from all walks of life that
Mm-hmm.
that performing. Um, I've met people from when I was performing. In any case, I'm no longer performing in that capacity. I met people from Africa, from Switzerland, from all sorts of destinations that as a person that is unfamiliar with the globe, or was not as familiar, maybe I should say, um, that piqued my interest.
Sure.
And when those people would say, well, come and visit us, unfortunately, I think, we say, let's do lunch, I'll call you. Those expressions are
Right.
usually pretty shallow. And the one thing I learned is, when you have met some of these people and they really extend them and the opportunity to come and visit, they mean it.
Mm-hmm.
And I recall a situation right after um, the show I was doing in San Diego. Um, I had met some gentlemen from Switzerland, from Zurich,
Yeah.
and we corresponded. We were pen pals. They really enjoyed the show, and they made the invitation of, if I ever come to Europe, to let them know. And so when I was living in LA, I actually took them up on that invitation, and I got a chance to experience Zurich probably
Mm.
like it wasn't your typical tourist experience.
Right.
So um, I do have fond memories of those times and the people that I've come across. And it has really, anytime I get a chance to travel back to Europe, I'm very excited because it's a whole new world to explore again
Mm-hmm.
and new friends to make. I'm working on my Spanish now, so that when I go to Spain in a couple of months, that I'll be able to converse better than your standard American tourist would. I'm looking forward to seeing my friends in Amsterdam again.
Mm-hmm.
My Dutch is a little rusty, but hopefully after a day I'll be fine.
Well, good.
Yeah, all
I,
these wonderful experiences. So
I'm always in awe of people that are bilingual, or have speak several languages, because I can just barely speak American coming from Texas. So it's just like, okay, just great on that one. But yeah, I think those perspectives and those connections you make, I think there's a very deep connection with some individuals that you have more than others. And when you do, it's really uh, great to be able to follow up on those, and visit them in those countries, and experience Switzerland. So hopefully, did you run into Tina Turner?
she wasn't there yet.
She wasn't. Okay. Well, she's there now, so hopefully you will. Um, but I think those experiences was what brings us together here. And then when you bring and add in being of color and the LGBTQ plus component and all the other things is, I think it really makes a very vivid example of what you can do with your life. So that's great. So when you do the blog, what the latest one was the dancer one, I think, wasn't it? Your latest.
The latest one was LA and the Porn Star.
That's right. I'll say it again. Caught my eye to do that one. And so, any ideas on what future ones are going to be? Topics?
Yes, I actually have quite a few already queued up. I sometimes get in these uh, writing fits, or
Mm-hmm.
whatever you want to call them, and I just write. And so I have one coming up called the Road Ahead. I have recently finished a leadership program with an organization called the American Leadership Forum of Oregon,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a year-long program. And so that wrapped up a couple of months ago. So there'll be a piece coming out probably within a couple of weeks about that. And then I was recently in San Diego for my high school reunion, along with the reunion with fellow castmates. And so there'll be a piece down the road, probably later this year as well, about that.
Mm-hmm.
So I've
And
got a
so,
couple of things.
those are great. So, what are some insights from the leadership forum? Is that what it's called?
You can
Um,
call it ALF for short,
ALF.
ALF.
So, what are some of the takeaways you came from ALF?
One of them is the fact that, we truly have a beautiful state.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
It is diverse, not in the sense of its people, but the landscape itself is very diverse. Uh, it has a very fragile ecosystem when it comes to water. Um, there are parts of our state that, whereas water has been a part of, let's say, a native the Native American communities within the
Right.
state of Oregon, water is a truly significant source of inspiration and spiritual
Mm-hmm.
awakening and so forth. Also, other things that I've learned is the fact that these small towns are all trying to do what they can to be relevant,
Right.
and they're getting a fresh um, influx of people returning to them, because they, as in these newcomers, no longer want to be in the big cities, and don't
Right.
have to, because as long as the internet works, they can work from anywhere.
Right. Absolutely.
So there's lots of things that I learned along the way.
Good. So, did you compare yourselves with your classmates at your reunion and say who looks better, who doesn't look better, or did you?
No, even though everyone was like, "You look the same," I just said thank you, even though I don't feel like I look the same. I
Yeah.
did have a name badge that had my senior class photo on it, and I had a lot of hair, unlike what I have now. But
Yeah. Absolutely.
um, I think I'm happy that I'm still able to attend these reunions.
Sure.
This was the 40th, and a lot of my classmates do look really well. Um, so
Well,
I think we're all lucky.
we are absolutely, but I came from a very small school in Texas. I think we had less than 200 in our high school, so my graduating class was 28.
Wow.
So when you go back, you're going, oh my gosh, how did I get out of here, for one thing? Make the move from rural Texas and a ranch to out into the Northwest. And then you look around and you're going, oh, these individuals are varied, but they're all very similar to their belief systems they had back then. So
Yeah. My
it's,
partner is also from a ranch in the Dakotas, so
yeah, yeah. different lifestyle entirely. Uh,
Indeed.
Absolutely. One of the other things that I saw you had utilized is Max List.
Yes.
And explain to me a little bit about and expand on how this helped. And my understanding is in finding your current position. So,
Sure. So MaxList is it's a job search site
mhm,
for the Pacific Northwest. There's a gentleman by the name of Mac Pritchard that he's the man behind the site that
yeah,
shares his name. I will say I used MaxList and other job boards for my searches, and I just signed up for notifications, and then there was one for um, a, a city position, not the position I currently have,
mhm,
that I applied for. And I have actually been trying to apply for the city for several years.
mhm.
Um, I just couldn't, you know, I lacked this or I lacked that or didn't have enough experience. Um, but this time that changed. That's different.
Yeah, I was unfamiliar with Max List, so it was really good to be able to find that because we post for my firm here, and so we'll start utilizing that site as well. But yeah,
Perfect.
but it's great that you were able to bring that job search Max List out to the public and to look at it because you did a interview with them, I believe, that was written out. I mean, it's on their website.
Yes.
Uh, that really, I think, for me personally, it was like, yeah, this is great. This is how it should work, and it's local. A lot of times we get into these job searches and they're more national and not localized in that perspective. So, one of the other things that I think we want to talk about is the future. And how do you think you would describe from your perspective what the future might look like, might not look like?
Hmm. Good question. So for my future professionally, I see myself staying on with the city of Portland, potentially in a different role
Mhm.
as the years go on. Um, from the personal standpoint, still living, loving, laughing, to be cliche, and you know, as for future generations or future for the city, that there's lots of things for everyone to learn. I think we're going to I say we collectively
Right,
need to make some hard decisions about what we want to accept, and we have to start saying no, that's not possible. So I'm not speaking from like a city employee,
right.
standpoint. So I just wanted to
Absolutely.
clarify.
Absolutely. This is a personal perspective on these things.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
and I think it's really up to those of a voting age, a younger voting
Right,
age, to really change how systems impact people.
right, right,
And I look at the systems of our social programs related to the unhoused folks or the folks with addictive issues.
right.
So there needs those systems really need to be, and even enforcement,
Hmm.
how that looks like or what that is going to look like. So all of these things really need some fresh eyes and a fresh take of intake of ideas if this is going to be a future for everyone.
Exactly. I think one of the more interesting things for me has been how, when you look at other countries, especially on the homelessness and the substance abuse issues and mental health treatment, there are some excellent programs out there. And again, we talked about that earlier, but
Mm,
I think if we were to take up those, look at them and implement some of them in smaller areas or in smaller states, it might be a good test to be able to solve some of our issues.
agreed.
Voting is number one for me. I think we have got to get the vote out. But it's really kind of interesting when I look at the not so much in the state governments, but federal governments, where everybody seems to be 80 plus. And it's like, it's time to turn this over to someone else and let them set the path for the future generations. Because even as I age, I go, the younger staff or younger individuals bring up something, oh, that's a really good idea. I would have never thought of that. So I think that the voting is key here. I'm just kind of sad we've had a step back, especially on women's rights and a few other things here recently. But I think we're going to have to get the vote out. Unfortunately, like you said, we live in a bubble up in the Northwest. Here, I'm in Washington State, and so we kind of tend to think that it's much better. But then I go back to Oklahoma and Texas, I'm going, oh no, it's getting worse here. So, well, is there anything else you would like to share with our audience regarding your journey, your perspectives, or anything?
I just want to say thank you. This has been a great opportunity. You can, follow me on Instagram. You can, check out my blog, judgedon'tjudge.blog. I look forward to
Great.
just seeing what the world has to offer.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Judge, for being our guest today. And I will have to say, I first thought you were a judge in the court system. And then I read your other thing. I'm like, no, I am not a judge. That's my name. I went, okay, got it. So I was going to have to be very prim and proper. I thought if you were a judge, a real judge. So thank goodness that didn't occur. But thank you so much. And I appreciate the time you spent, and good luck.
Thank you so much, Gary.